Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments from which city you are watching, because what I am about to tell you is not just a story, it is a confession from the deepest corners of my memory. I was barely 19 when the letter arrived, written in an old slanted hand that carried the smell of dust and forgotten years. It was from a notary in a small town I had only heard about in whispers during family gatherings. The letter informed me that I had inherited a house, an ancestral home left behind by my grandparents, people who had died before I was even born. My parents had never spoken much of them, except to say that they lived too far away, too far from everything. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Why would they leave me, a girl they never met, such a place? But when I showed the letter to my mother, she went pale. Her hand shook as she folded the paper again, pressing it flat against the table. She didn't meet my eyes. All she said was, "That house should have stayed buried." And that was the first hook, the first shiver down my spine. The way her voice trembled, the way she refused to say another word. Right then, I knew. If you're listening to this now, you better subscribe, because what follows is a tale you won't forget, and I promise you will want to come back for more. I took the train a week later. The journey was long, the kind that makes your thoughts grow heavy and strange. But when I arrived in that little town, I realized no journey could have prepared me. The villagers looked at me as though they already knew who I was. An old man selling apples at the station spat on the ground when I passed. A woman crossed herself, and when I asked for directions to the old Hargrove estate, my family's name, no one would speak. They only stared as though I had asked for the road to hell. Finally, a boy, no older than 12, pointed with a shaking hand. "Up the hill," he whispered. "But don't stay after dark." Then he ran. Write down in the comments if you've ever been to a place where the air itself felt cursed. Because when I climbed that hill, I swear, even the birds refused to sing. The house came into view just as the sun dipped low, a massive structure of blackened stone and sagging wood, its windows like hollow eyes staring at me. My inheritance, my curse. The door groaned when I pushed it open, the sound so loud it echoed across the empty valley. Dust swirled in beams of fading light, and for a moment I thought I heard footsteps upstairs. But no one had lived here for decades, or so I told myself. I moved through the rooms with a lantern, my heart pounding. There were photographs on the walls, old cracked portraits of people with my blood in their veins, but faces I could not recognize. They stared back at me with strange glassy eyes. Some smiles were too wide, some expressions too empty. And then I found the letter. It lay on the grand piano in the parlor, sealed with dark red wax. The seal was unbroken, though the paper had yellowed with time. My name was written on it, my name, in the same slanted hand as the notary's letter. "Do not open it," I whispered to myself, but I did. The letter read, "You were never meant to come here. They do not rest, they do not forgive, and they know you now. Like if your skin just crawled, because mine did. And subscribe, because the deeper I go, the more I realize this story is not just about ghosts. It is about my family's sins and how they still breathe in the walls of that house." That night, I tried to sleep in one of the upstairs bedrooms, but sleep would not come. The walls creaked, the floorboards sighed, and more than once I heard whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, but wind does not say your name. Yes, I heard it. A voice soft as breath calling me, "Clara." That was the name of my grandmother, but it was also my middle name. Tell me in the comments, do you believe the dead can speak? Because I had always laughed at such ideas. until that night. The mirror in the corner of the room fogged, though the air was cold, and when I looked into it, I did not see my reflection. I saw a woman standing behind me, pale, hollow, her eyes wide with grief and rage. I turned, but the room was empty. The door slammed shut by itself, and then the piano downstairs began to play, a single note at first, then another, then a slow, haunting melody that I somehow recognized. A lullaby my mother used to hum when I was a child. My breath caught. I remembered asking her once where she learned it, and she had said, "I don't remember." But the house remembered. Subscribe now, because what happened next still makes me wake up screaming, even now, decades later. The house had chosen me. The ghosts had found me, and there was no going back. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments from which city you are watching, because once you hear the rest of this story, you'll understand why I can never close my eyes in silence anymore. The night in that house stretched on like a punishment. I could hear the piano echoing from below, but when I finally gathered the courage to go downstairs, the sound stopped abruptly, as if the house knew I was coming. The keys were still trembling when I reached the parlor, as though invisible fingers had just lifted from them. The letter on the piano, the one warning me that they knew me, was gone. In its place was something else, a photograph. An old sepia-toned image of a family sitting in front of the very same house. My grandparents were there, younger than I had ever imagined them, their faces grim and unsmiling. Beside them stood a girl who looked exactly like me. Comment if you've ever seen a picture that made you feel like the ground beneath you was no longer solid. Because that photograph, it shouldn't have existed. And yet it did. I couldn't breathe. I dropped the photo on the floor and it cracked under my fingers, the glass shattering into jagged pieces. In the reflection of the shards, I saw faces, not mine, not my grandparents', but countless others, all staring back, their mouths open in a silent scream. I stumbled back, clutching my lantern, and in the sudden flare of light I saw her again, the woman from the mirror. She was in the corner of the room, pale as ash, her long hair clinging to her hollow cheeks. This time she didn't vanish. She only raised one finger to her lips, demanding silence. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me until I thought my lungs would burst. And then I heard it. Whispers crawling out of the walls, voices overlapping, desperate, pleading. They weren't in English, they weren't in any language I knew. But they filled my head like smoke, choking me, until one word finally rose above the rest. Stay. Write in the comments if you'd have run or stayed, because I'll be honest, I wanted to run more than I'd ever wanted anything in my life. But something rooted me there, something stronger than fear. A part of me felt chosen. I forced myself to stumble toward the hallway, my lantern flickering with every step. That was when I noticed it. The staircase, once covered in dust, now bore footprints. Fresh, bare, leading upward. My own legs betrayed me as I followed them. Up, step by step, into the darkness. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, until I reached the attic door. It was locked with a thick iron bolt, but the footprint stopped there, vanishing into the wood itself, and then the bolt slid open, by itself. Subscribe right now, because opening that door was the worst mistake of my life. But you need to know what I saw. The attic smelled of rot and mildew, but underneath it was another scent, faint but unmistakable. Blood. My lantern's light danced across the beams, revealing old trunks, broken furniture, and something else. Dozens of dolls lined neatly against the wall. Each one hand-sewn, each one staring with button eyes, and each one wearing a tiny scrap of clothing that looked real. I knelt down to pick one up. Its dress was tattered, stained brown in places. My stomach turned when I realized it wasn't just a dress. It was cut from a larger garment, a child's garment. Behind the dolls, carved into the wall, were names. Hundreds of them. Some so faded I could barely read them, others carved fresh and deep, and at the very bottom, beneath all the others, was mine. I dropped the doll. The whispers in the wall surged into a roar, and before I could turn, the attic door slammed shut behind me. The dolls began to sway. Slowly, in unison, their little heads tilting toward me. And then they laughed. Not high-pitched and innocent, but guttural, broken laughs that shook the beams above me. I screamed. I pounded on the door, but it would not open. My lantern flickered once, twice, then went out. Darkness swallowed me whole. And in that blackness, I felt hands. Dozens of them, tiny and ice-cold, clutching at my arms, my legs, my throat, pulling me down. The last thing I remember before fainting was the sound of the piano starting again below, louder this time, the lullaby twisting into something jagged and wrong. When I woke, I was back in the bedroom. The sun was rising, light cutting across the floor. The door was wide open. The dolls were gone. And the photograph was back on the piano, but this time, the girl who looked like me was smiling. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments. Would you dare step back into that attic after what I saw? Because I did. And what I found there revealed why my family never wanted me to know about that house, and why the dead will never let me leave it. I froze in the kitchen, the sound of those 3 knocks echoing through the empty halls. For a moment, I thought perhaps it was a villager, someone curious enough or cruel enough to follow me up the hill. But no footsteps had approached, no voices drifted from outside, only those knocks, patient, expectant. I moved to the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The door loomed ahead, tall and blackened with age, the brass handle dulled from time. I gripped the lantern, though its flame wavered as if it too was afraid. The knocks came again. I swallowed, pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. Nothing. Just my own heartbeat pounding too loud. And then a whisper. On the other side of the door. My name? Not Clara. Not the middle name tied to my grandmother. My own name. Spoken with a voice that was both male and female, young and old, all at once. I stumbled back, shaking my head. This wasn't possible. No one should even know I was here. The handle turned, slowly, metal grinding against metal as though centuries of rust fought against it. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The latch clicked, but the door didn't open. Instead, a gust of air pushed through the keyhole, cold and damp, smelling of earth and decay. It wrapped around me, lifting the hair on my arms, carrying with it the faintest sound of children laughing. I fled. My feet carried me back up the stairs, 2 at a time, until I collapsed in the room where I had tried to sleep. I shut the door, pressed my back against it, and waited for the knocks to follow me. But they didn't. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Still, I could not bring myself to leave. I sat there, listening, watching the mirror in the corner for any sign of her return. And that was when I noticed something scratched into the glass. Words, faint, only visible when the light struck them at a certain angle. We are inside. My pulse hammered in my ears. I grabbed a sheet from the bed and threw it over the mirror, but even covered, I could feel the weight of the words pressing through, as though the glass itself still whispered them. I don't know how long I sat like that, knees pulled to my chest, trying to steady my breath. But eventually, curiosity forced me back downstairs. The door stood exactly as I had left it, closed, the handle unmoved, but the piano was playing again. This time, not the lullaby. This time, it played a funeral march. The sound of that funeral march drifted through every corner of the house, heavy and deliberate, each note dragging like chains across the floor. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating against my ribs. My first instinct was to run outside, to throw open the door and flee down the hill until the house was nothing more than a shadow in the distance. But something stronger than fear held me there, a force I couldn't explain, as though the house itself had hooked its claws into me. I forced myself to step into the parlor. The piano's lid was open, the keys sinking one by one, though no hands pressed them. The air shimmered above the instrument, like heat rising from fire, and in that ripple I saw faces, dozens, maybe hundreds, fleeting and blurred, screaming silently as they disappeared back into the air. Then the music stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I stood, trembling, waiting, praying it was over. But the stillness didn't last long. A creak came from the hallway, not the front door this time, but deeper in the house. The sound of slow, dragging steps. I turned, lantern in hand, and saw a shadow move across the far wall. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. It didn't walk like a man. It glided, its feet never quite touching the ground. I stumbled backward, but the lantern's flame flared suddenly, bright and white, and for a second I thought I saw its face. Hollow eyes, a mouth stretched wide into a black void. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. My mind screamed at me to leave, but when I looked toward the door, I saw something that froze me where I stood. The bolt was sealed again. Not just sealed, fused, as if the metal had melted into the wood. I was trapped. I pressed my forehead to the cold surface, trying to fight the rising panic. That was when I noticed the photographs on the wall again. Only this time, they had changed. The faces of my ancestors were gone. Every frame now held the same image, me. Standing in front of the house, my expression blank, my eyes blackened. Some of the pictures were cracked as though scratched from the inside. I ripped one from the wall and smashed it against the floor. Glass shattered, the frame splintered, but the photograph remained whole. My hands shook as I picked it up. The image shifted as I stared at it. My mouth, once closed, curled into that same unnatural smile I had seen on the girl in the first photograph. I dropped it and ran. The house seemed to stretch as I moved, hallways longer than before, rooms opening where there hadn't been any. Every door I tried led me back into the same space. The dining room, table set for a meal that would never come. Each time I returned, another place setting appeared. First 4, then 6, then 10, all waiting. And then I realized the chairs were no longer empty. Figures sat in them, slumped forward, their faces hidden by long hair or shadows. At first, they were still. But as I backed away, their heads rose in unison. Their eyes were gone, hollow sockets staring straight through me. The figure at the head of the table lifted a skeletal hand and pointed at the chair nearest to it. I don't know how or why, but my legs moved toward it. I sat down. The air grew colder still, the figures leaning closer until their presence smothered me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was no longer mine. The head of the table reached forward and placed something in front of me. A plate, silver, old, etched with strange symbols, and on it lay a folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, I opened it. You belong to us. The words bled across the page as though they were alive, twisting into shapes that crawled over the paper. My stomach turned, and when I looked up again, the figures were gone. Every chair was empty. The table was bare. I sat in silence, the paper still in my hand, until the sound of the attic door creaked open above me. The same pull that had drawn me to the parlor, the same unseen force that had dragged me to the dining table, now urged me toward the staircase again. I fought it with every step, but still I climbed, until I stood once more before the attic. The air that poured from it was suffocating, thick with the smell of rot and iron. My lantern flickered, nearly dying, but I forced myself inside. The dolls were back, lined against the wall just as before, but there were more of them now, twice as many. Their button eyes glittered in the faint light, and one by one their heads turned to follow me. I tried to leave. The door slammed shut, and then the dolls began to sing. It was the lullaby, the same one the piano had played, the same one my mother used to hum. But their voices were broken, shrill, like glass scraping against stone. My knees buckled, the sound burrowing into my skull. One doll, smaller than the rest, shuffled forward without moving its legs, sliding across the floor until it was at my feet. It looked up at me, and for the first time, its stitched mouth opened. My turn, it whispered. I screamed, but no sound left my throat. The walls trembled, the floorboards groaned, and then the attic collapsed into darkness. When the darkness swallowed me, I thought I had died. For a few endless moments there was no sound, no breath, no sensation of my body at all, only the sensation of falling as though the attic floor had given way beneath me and I was plunging into a bottomless pit. Then, slowly, the world returned, the creak of wood shifting above me, the heavy stench of damp earth, the faint glow of my lantern still flickering weakly at my side. But the attic was gone. I was standing in a space I had never seen before. The walls were stone, slick with moisture, carved with symbols I could not read. They pulsed faintly, like veins alive with some hidden current. The ceiling arched high above, yet the shadows made it feel oppressively close. And in the center of the chamber stood a circle of chairs, 12 of them, all facing inward. Each chair was occupied. I froze, lantern raised, though I wished I had no light at all. The figures slumped in those chairs were not the dolls from before, and they were not entirely human either. Some were skeletal, skin drawn tight over bones like parchment. Others were bloated and gray, their faces half decayed. Their heads lolled forward, lifeless. But when I stepped closer, their chests rose. Slow, shallow breaths. Inhale, exhale. They were alive. The lantern shook in my hand, its glow spilling across the floor. And that was when I saw it. A second circle, carved into the stone at their feet, a circle of names. Hundreds, maybe thousands, etched deep into the ground. I scanned the inscriptions, and though many were faded, others stood clear as if freshly cut. And there it was, again. My name. I staggered backward, but my heel struck something. Another chair, an empty one. The 13th. The instant my body touched it, the figure stirred. Head snapped upright, jaws creaked open, and a sound like 1,000 sighs filled the chamber. The air grew frigid. My lantern flickered violently. One of them leaned forward, its eyes like black pits, and spoke. You came back. I shook my head, stammering. I don't belong here. I don't. The others answered as one, their voices layering into a single deafening chord. You always belonged. The lantern went out. I was left in utter blackness, their breaths surrounding me, their voices pressing into my mind like claws. Images filled my head, visions not my own. Children standing outside the house, drawn in by music. Villagers dragging bodies up the hill in the dead of night. Screams buried in the walls. My family, bound to it all, their blood a thread tying them forever to this place. And me, the latest thread. The circle flared suddenly with pale light, illuminating every name carved in stone. Some names pulsed brighter, others faded, like stars in a dying sky. Mine glowed brightest of all. The figures began to chant, low guttural sounds that made my stomach twist. The walls quivered. Dust rained from the ceiling. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound wasn't only in the air. It was inside me, crawling beneath my skin, rattling in my bones. I screamed until my throat tore, but they didn't stop. The circle grew hotter beneath my feet. Smoke rose from the cracks, carrying with it the smell of burning flesh. My vision blurred. My body shook violently, as though being pulled apart. And then, silence. The figures slumped forward again, lifeless once more. The light faded. I was alone. The lantern flickered back to life on its own, a faint, pitiful flame. My legs gave way, and I collapsed to the ground, sobbing, the carved name still glowing faintly beneath my hands. It was only then that I realized the worst part. The name beside mine had begun to change. Letter by letter, it twisted and reshaped itself until it spelled another name. My mother's. A scream tore from my chest. I stumbled to my feet, hammering my fists against the walls, clawing at the stone as if I could erase it. But the harder I struck, the brighter the name burned. The circle had chosen her next. I don't know how long I pounded against the stone before exhaustion dragged me down. When I finally lifted my head again, I was no longer in the chamber. I was lying on the bedroom floor, the lantern beside me, its flame steady now. Morning light filtered through the cracked shutters, dust drifting lazily in the air. The house looked ordinary again, silent, still, but I knew better. The photograph was waiting on the dresser. My mother's face had joined mine now, both of us smiling, both of us trapped inside the frame. I crawled toward the dresser, my body weak and trembling as though I had run for miles in the dead of night. The photograph glared at me from the wood, its glass clean, its edges unbroken, though I remembered smashing the first one. Now there were two figures in it, standing side by side in front of the house, myself and my mother. Both of us smiling that same unnatural smile, our eyes dark hollows. I whispered her name, my breath hitching, and for a moment I thought I saw her lips move inside the picture, as though she were whispering back. I dropped the frame, my hands shaking so violently that it clattered to the floor, but it didn't break. The photo only slid closer to my feet, like the house itself refused to let me distance myself from it. I ran. Down the stairs, past the silent parlor, past the dining room with its empty table, my lungs burning with panic. When I reached the front door, I slammed my fists against the melted bolt, clawing, kicking, screaming for it to give. But the iron remained fused, smooth as if it had always been that way. My cries echoed through the hollow halls, swallowed by the house itself. And then the air changed. It thickened, heavy with the smell of earth and mold pressing against my skin. The photographs along the walls began to shift again. Their faces flickered, one moment showing long-dead relatives, the next moment showing me. Dozens of versions of me, all trapped in frames, all smiling with lifeless eyes. I stumbled back, horrified, as one by one, those smiles began to move. Their mouths opened, and in perfect unison, every photograph whispered the same word. Stay. My heart thundered. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the whisper rose to a hiss, then to a scream. The sound vibrated through the walls, through the floor, through my bones. The entire house was screaming at me to stay. I bolted toward the back of the house, crashing through a narrow corridor I hadn't noticed before. The walls closed in around me, the ceiling sagging low until I burst into a doorless frame that led to a staircase spiraling downward. The cellar. The air grew colder with each step I descended. Dampness clung to my throat, and the smell of rotting earth was almost unbearable. My lantern quivered, its flame nearly snuffed by the draft that oozed from below. At the bottom, I found another chamber, not like the one with the chairs. This one was older, rougher, the walls made of stone stacked by hand. And yet, there was something precise about it, something deliberate. In the center of the room lay a pit, shallow at first glance, but when I leaned over it, the lantern's light couldn't touch the bottom. Only darkness, endless. Ropes hung from the ceiling above the pit. Stained ropes, frayed with age, still tied in knots as if they had once held something. Or someone. On the wall beside the pit were markings. Deep scratches, like fingernails clawing against stone. Some had drawn blood. I could still see the brown crust, even after decades. My breath caught when I noticed something carved among those scratches. A single phrase, repeated again and again in frantic, uneven handwriting. Do not answer when they call your name. I staggered back, my hand clamped to my mouth. And then I heard it. My name. From the pit. Soft at first, like a whisper carried by wind, but rising louder, clearer, until it echoed through the chamber. My knees nearly buckled. I pressed my back to the wall, shaking my head. No, I muttered. No, no, no. The voice grew more desperate, more urgent. Help me. It was my mother's voice. I screamed, hurling the lantern into the pit as though the light itself could silence the horror. It vanished into the black swallowed hole. The glow never returned. Only the voice did, calling again and again, until it wasn't my mother anymore. Until it was me. I heard myself crying from that pit, begging, clawing, screaming for release. And that was when I saw the ropes begin to move. They tightened, twisting, as if unseen hands still pulled them taut. The air filled with the sound of straining hemp, the knots creaking. Something tugged at them from below, hard enough to make the ceiling groan. Then the ropes snapped free. They lashed across the room like whips, striking the stone walls, slashing across my arm. Pain seared through me, warm blood trickling down my skin. I fled up the stairs, stumbling, the house shaking beneath my feet. When I reached the parlor again, everything was silent. The piano closed, the photographs blank, the whispers gone. But on the floor where I had dropped the frame, the photograph had changed again. It wasn't just me and my mother anymore. Now there were 3 of us, and the third face was smiling wider than the rest. It was mine, but older, wrinkled, gray, the face of the woman I would become. The house was already showing me the end. I stared at that photograph until my vision blurred, until my eyes burned with tears I couldn't stop. 3 figures, all bound together in that cursed frame. My younger self, my mother, and the woman I had yet to become. The older version of me had that same hollow-eyed grin, the one carved onto every face the house claimed. It was not the smile of joy. It was the smile of surrender. I wanted to smash the frame again, to rip it apart and burn it to ash, but something in me knew it would be useless. The first photograph had already proven that. Destroy it, and it comes back. Look away, and it changes. Resist, and it shows you things you cannot unsee. I staggered back into the hallway, clutching my bleeding arm. The house was quiet now, too quiet. But I had learned enough in those hours to know that silence was worse than the whispers. Silence meant the house was waiting, watching, listening for my next step. I pressed myself against the wall, my body trembling, and forced myself to think. Every ghost story I had ever heard as a child, every tale of restless spirits came flooding back. People said ghosts haunted because of unfinished business, because they were trapped between worlds. But this was not just haunting. This was hunger. The house didn't simply hold the dead, it fed on the living. I crept down the hallway, each floorboard sighing beneath my weight. The smell of dust and mildew hung heavy in the air, mingled with something sharper now. Iron, like fresh blood. It grew stronger as I passed the staircase, until I found myself standing at the threshold of a door I hadn't noticed before. It was narrow, almost hidden in the shadow of the stairwell, its frame warped as though the house itself wanted to keep it secret. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. It turned easily, far too easily, as if something inside had been waiting for me. The door opened onto a corridor that slanted downward, the ceiling low, the walls narrowing the deeper it went. The air here was different, colder, wetter, thick with the smell of earth. I ducked and pressed forward, my footsteps echoing in the cramped space until I reached another chamber. This one was smaller, but more terrible than anything I had seen. The walls were lined with shelves, not bookshelves, not storage. These shelves held jars, dozens, maybe hundreds, stacked 3 deep, their glass fogged with age, their contents murky and indistinct. But when I lifted one, when I dared to hold it up to the dim light, I saw what floated inside. Eyes, human eyes, suspended in cloudy fluid, lids peeled back, pupils wide and staring. Some still twitched, as if alive, as if aware. I dropped the jar, my scream strangled in my throat, glass shattering across the stone floor. The sound echoed like thunder through the chamber, and as it died away, the rest of the jars began to rattle on their shelves. One by one, their lids popped open. Eyes rolled out onto the floor, bouncing and skittering like marbles, some bursting, some sliding toward me as though drawn to my feet. I stumbled back, slipping on shards of glass until my back struck the far wall. And there, carved into the stone, was another message. We see through you. The eyes pressed closer, rolling, twitching, surrounding me, and in every one of them, I saw reflection. My face, my smile, my hollow, blackened eyes staring back. I shoved past them, scraping my palms bloody against the wall as I clawed my way back into the narrow corridor. Behind me, the jars clattered to the floor, shattering in unison, the sound chasing me like a wave. I crawled, half blind with panic, until I burst out into the main hall again, gasping for air. The house seemed alive now, every wall groaning, every beam shifting. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, reaching across the floor like grasping fingers. I staggered to the staircase, gripping the banister to steady myself, but the wood pulsed beneath my hand, warm as though it had veins. My blood chilled. The house was not just haunted. It was living, breathing, feeding on me with every step. And then the piano began again. Not the lullaby, not the funeral march, something new. A song I didn't recognize, yet one that crawled into me like a memory I should have had all along. A dirge that was not just music, but language. A call. From upstairs, I didn't want to go. My body screamed to resist. But my legs moved anyway, dragging me up the stairs toward the sound. Each note pressed heavier against my chest, slowing my heart, clouding my thoughts until I could no longer tell if I was walking or being carried. At the top of the stairs, I saw her, the woman from the mirror. She sat at a piano that had not been there before, her pale fingers gliding across keys made of bone. Her long hair fell across her shoulders like a veil. Her hollow eyes locked on me as though she had been waiting forever. "Welcome home," she whispered. And then she smiled. The same smile from the photographs. The same smile that now lived in my face. The music swelled, shaking the walls, rattling the windows. I stumbled forward, unable to resist, until I stood beside her. Her hands paused on the keys, and she tilted her head, studying me with something between pity and triumph. "Play," she said. My hands lifted against my will, settling onto the keys. The instant my fingers touched them, the room darkened, the air turned to ice, and the house exhaled around me. And I played. Notes I had never learned, a melody I could never forget, a song that bound me tighter with every chord, pulling me deeper into the house's hunger. My fingers bled against the bone keys, but still I played, the sound echoing through every corridor, every hidden chamber, every jar and photograph. And in the music, I heard them all. The dead, my family, myself, all singing through me. The keys beneath my fingers felt alive, throbbing with a pulse that was not my own. Each note I struck reverberated not only through the house, but through me, deeper than marrow, as if my very soul was strung like an instrument. My blood ran hot, then cold, then vanished altogether, replaced by something older, something that hummed with the vibrations of countless voices. I wanted to stop. I begged my hands in silence to let go, to lift from the keys, but they did not belong to me anymore. They belonged to her, to the woman beside me. She leaned closer as I played, her lips brushing my ear, her whisper colder than death itself. "This is how we stay." Her words sank into me, and for an instant I saw what she meant. I saw through her hollow eyes, back into time, into centuries of the same song being played by hands that were not hers. Generations. Each heir pulled into this place, each one chained to the melody until their bodies rotted and their faces replaced the ones in the photographs on the wall. The woman was not the first. She was merely the last before me. My stomach lurched, bile burning my throat. I tried to tear myself free, to wrench my fingers from the keys, but each time I fought, the sound grew harsher, the house shuddering like it was in pain. The floor trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. The piano's resonance thickened into screams, not hers, not mine, but hundreds of voices, all fused into one. I slammed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the music was in me now. My own heartbeat followed its rhythm, my breath rising and falling with its tempo. I was part of the song, and then the house showed me more. Behind my eyelids, visions erupted, flashes of every soul the house had ever devoured. Children dragged up the hill, their tiny shoes scuffing the dirt, their cries muffled by strong hands. Men and women locked inside the attic, forced to sit in that circle of chairs, their names carved into stone as their eyes were stripped from them. Families gathered around the dining table, smiling those impossible smiles, their bodies nothing but husks as the house feasted on whatever life remained inside them. I saw my grandparents there, their faces hollow, their bodies chained to the song. And in the darkest corner, I saw my mother. She was younger, terrified, pounding her fists against the walls, screaming my name. Not the name she had given me at birth, the other one, Clara, the one tied to the bloodline. The visions ended as abruptly as they began, leaving me gasping, my forehead dripping with sweat. When I opened my eyes, the woman was gone. The piano, too. I was alone in the hallway, my hands empty, though the echo of the song still quaked inside my ribs. And then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, descending from the attic. I lifted my head. The staircase was dark, shadows stretched too far, too long, but something moved within them. A shape. Tall, spindly, its limbs bent like broken branches, dragging itself downward, one step at a time. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat, but the shadows crawled faster, bleeding down the stairs until they spilled across the floor like ink. They reached for me, curling around my ankles, my wrists, tugging me back toward the steps. I screamed, kicking, clawing at the air, but they only grew tighter, their cold touch biting into my skin. The shape above descended further, its head cocking at an unnatural angle, its hollow sockets fixed on me. "Stay," it rasped, in a voice that was many voices, layered and broken. I thrashed, desperate, and for a moment I thought I would be dragged upward, swallowed into the attic forever. But then the house shifted. The floor beneath us groaned, a violent tremor running through the walls. The photographs rattled on their hooks, glass cracking, until one by one they fell and shattered. The shape froze, tilting its head toward the sound, as if distracted. And in that heartbeat, I broke free. I bolted down the corridor, stumbling blindly, my body scraped and bruised. I didn't care where I was going. I only knew I had to move, had to escape the thing that had crawled from the attic. The house twisted around me as I ran. Doors appeared where none had been before. Staircases ended in blank walls. Corridors bent back into themselves. I felt like a rat, trapped in a maze designed by something that did not want me to leave. Finally, gasping, I slammed into a door I didn't recognize. Unlike the others, this one was not warped or rotted. It was pristine, white, its handle gleaming as though untouched by time. My hand shook as I reached for it. I expected resistance, but it opened with ease. The room inside was small, bare, and in the center stood a single object, a cradle. I stepped closer, my throat tight, my chest heaving. The cradle rocked gently, though no breeze stirred the air, and when I peered inside, my heart nearly stopped. A baby lay there, its skin pale as milk, its lips blue, its eyes open and unblinking. But when it saw me, it smiled. My smile. I stumbled back, slamming against the wall. The cradle rocked harder, the baby giggling, a sound that split into dozens of echoes, each laugh harsher than the last. The cradle tipped. The baby spilled onto the floor, its body limp, but it didn't stop moving. Its tiny limbs bent backward, cracking, reshaping, stretching until it rose on spindly legs, its grin stretching wider. And in my own voice, it spoke, "Mother." The word split me apart. I shook my head violently, tears spilling hot down my cheeks. No, I'm not. It lurched closer, its body jerking with every step, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. "Mother?" it said again, louder this time, sharper. I pressed myself to the wall, desperate for escape. But the house was silent now, watching, waiting. The creature lifted a hand, tiny fingers elongated into claws, and pointed toward the dresser at the far end of the room. My eyes followed. Another photograph sat there, framed in silver. This time, it showed 4 figures. Me, my mother, my older self, and the baby, all smiling. The creature tilted its head, its grin splitting wider than flesh should allow, and whispered, "Now we are complete." And then the door behind me slammed shut. I hurled myself against the door, clawing at the handle until my fingernails tore and my palms split open. But it was no use. The wood might as well have been stone. The room pulsed around me, the very walls alive, breathing in rhythm with the creature that called itself my child. Its laughter grew sharper, its voice bouncing from corner to corner, multiplying until it felt as though 1,000 mouths whispered, "Mother, mother, mother," into my ears all at once. The photograph on the dresser glowed faintly as though lit from within. I couldn't look away. The faces inside it stared back, all of them mine, and yet not mine, each one more hollow, more broken. My mother's figure seemed to lean closer in the frame, pressing her hand against the inside of the glass as if trying to reach me. The creature lurched nearer, its spindly frame twitching with jerks and spasms, bones snapping as it reshaped itself with every step. I backed into the corner, the air thick with rot and mildew, the floor trembling beneath me. Then silence. The laughter cut off. The whispers stopped. Even my own ragged breathing seemed muted, swallowed by something greater. The creature froze, head cocked, its grin still carved into its face. And then the cradle began to rock again. But it wasn't empty anymore. Another baby lay inside, identical to the first. Pale skin, blue lips, hollow eyes. It smiled as the cradle rocked faster, harder, until the wooden frame cracked and splintered. The second child slid free, crawling across the floor toward me, its nails scraping deep grooves into the wood. And then another appeared, and another. The cradle spilled them out endlessly, each one a perfect copy of the first, each one bearing my smile, my eyes, my voice. Soon the room was crawling with them, dozens of pale, twisted infants dragging themselves across the floor, climbing the walls, clawing toward me with relentless hunger. I screamed, my voice breaking. The sound ripped raw from my throat. I kicked, I fought. But every time I shoved one away, two more clambered closer. Their tiny fingers dug into my skin, their teeth snapping at my arms and legs. The room reeked of blood and sour milk, of death that never ended. The dresser shook violently, the photograph rattling against the wood until it crashed to the floor. The glass shattered, but instead of shards, black liquid poured from the frame, thick and tar-like. It spread across the floor, swallowing the infants, pulling them down one by one. They shrieked in my voice as they sank into the darkness, their hands reaching up, their hollow eyes fixed on me until the last of them vanished. The liquid spread further, reaching my shoes, seeping into the cracks of the floorboards. I stumbled backward, trying to escape, but the room was drowning in it. Then, from the black pool, figures began to rise. Not infants this time, adults, dozens of them. Men, women, old, young, all with my face. Some were twisted and decayed, their flesh hanging in strips. Others looked whole, untouched, but all of them bore the same smile, the smile that had haunted every photograph. They surrounded me, their movements slow and deliberate, their blackened eyes unblinking. One stepped closer, and I felt my legs give out. She knelt before me, her face inches from mine. She was me, but older, far older, her skin shriveled, her hair long and gray, her body wrapped in rags. She cupped my chin with a cold, bony hand and whispered, "You are the beginning and the end. The house is you." I shook my head violently, sobbing, clawing at her hand, but her grip tightened until my jaw ached. The others leaned closer, their voices layering into a low, thunderous chant. Stay, stay, stay. The black liquid surged upward, engulfing my legs, my waist, my chest. I thrashed wildly, but the hands of the others held me down, pressing me into the pool. The cold sank deep into me, choking me, freezing me from the inside out. I thought I would drown, but instead, the darkness opened. The liquid was not water. It was a passage, a tunnel carved from shadows and whispers, pulling me deeper, deeper, until I landed hard on stone. When I lifted my head, I was no longer in the cradle room. I was in a cathedral. Its ceiling stretched into nothingness, supported by blackened beams that wept streams of ash. Rows of pews filled the hall, and every seat was occupied. Not by people, but by husks, eyeless, rotted forms slumped forward, their bodies bound to the benches with chains of rust. At the altar stood the piano, and behind it, the woman from the mirror. She raised her head as I stumbled forward, her hollow eyes gleaming in the dim light of countless candles. Her voice echoed through the cathedral, resonant and commanding. Play and join us, or refuse and end her. Her hand lifted, and from the shadows at her feet, my mother appeared. She was bound in chains, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. She shook her head violently, tears streaking down her cheeks. My chest caved in. I fell to my knees, sobbing, shaking, every part of me torn in two. My mother's gaze locked on mine, desperate, pleading, her lips forming words I could not hear. The woman gestured to the piano again. The keys gleamed like bone. I crawled closer, my body trembling, my tears falling onto the stone. The congregation of husks leaned forward in unison, their hollow mouths stretching open, waiting. My hands hovered above the keys. If I played, I knew what would happen. I would be bound to the house forever. My face would join the photographs, my soul another note in the endless song. But if I refused, the chains around my mother would tighten, crushing her, dragging her into the shadows forever. The house would not let us both go. I drew in a shuddering breath, my eyes locked on hers. She mouthed the words again, this time clearer. Don't. The choice tore me apart. Behind me, the husks began to chant, their voices shaking the cathedral walls. Play, play, play. And above them all, the woman smiled. Choose. My hands hovered over the bone-white keys, trembling so violently that they rattled in their sockets. The air in the cathedral grew heavier, pressing down on me until it felt like I was drowning on dry land. My mother's eyes burned into mine, wide and desperate, her head shaking again and again as she mouthed the word don't. But the husks that filled the pews leaned forward in unison, their hollow mouths opening wider, their chant swelling louder. Play, play, play. The sound reverberated through the blackened beams overhead, shook dust and ash from the ceiling, rattled the chains that bound them to their seats. My heart pounded in my throat, each beat matching the tempo of their chant, until it felt as though I had already become part of their rhythm. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears burning hot against my skin. I couldn't do it. I couldn't damn myself to this place. Not when I had seen what it did, not when I had heard the screams buried in its walls. But if I refused, I would lose her. The woman behind the piano leaned closer, her face pale and unblinking, her hollow sockets locked on me. When she spoke, her voice was no longer her own. It was my voice. If you won't play, she will. The chains binding my mother jerked violently, dragging her closer to the altar. She screamed, a raw sound that tore through the cathedral and ripped into me like claws. Her hands clawed at the stone, her nails leaving bloody trails as the shadows pulled her forward. No! I screamed, slamming my hands down onto the keys. The sound that followed was not music. It was a shriek, a wail so sharp it splintered the air, rattling the pews, cracking the stone floor beneath us. My body convulsed as the vibration surged through me, ripping at my insides, filling my lungs with fire. My mother collapsed to the ground, gasping as the chains loosened slightly. The husks roared with approval, their chant turning into a cacophony of screams and laughter. Their eyeless heads shook violently, their mouths stretching wider until their jaws cracked. And still, I played. My fingers moved without thought, tearing across the keys in patterns I didn't understand, but my body knew them. My blood knew them. The melody rose and fell like a tide of despair, each note dragging me deeper into the house's hunger. My veins burned, my skin split, but I couldn't stop. I looked at my mother. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, mouthing that single word again and again. Don't. But I couldn't let go. The woman smiled. Her teeth were too many, too sharp, gleaming in the candlelight. She stepped back, letting me take her place at the piano, her hollow sockets glowing faintly as she raised her arms to the congregation. She plays for us now. The husks howled, the pews shook. The cathedral itself seemed to quake, as if the house was alive, feeding on the sound, growing stronger with every note. And then the faces came. They poured from the shadows, pressed into the walls, crawling across the ceiling. Faces of those who had played before me, generations of my family, their mouths open in eternal screams. My grandparents, my great-grandparents, children. All of them bound, all of them chained. Their voices fused into the melody. I saw myself among them. Dozens of me, each trapped in different stages of life. A child, a woman, an old crone. All smiling that same impossible smile. All staring at me, urging me deeper. The music surged louder. My hands bled, my fingers cracking against the bone keys, but still I played. My body was breaking, my mind shattering, but the song consumed me. And then, silence. The husks slumped back in their seats. The cathedral grew still. My hands hovered above the keys, blood dripping onto the ivory, my chest heaving as I gasped for air. The woman leaned closer. Now you see, she whispered, there is no leaving. You are the house. The house is you, and she is next. Her hand pointed to my mother. The chains tightened again. No! I screamed, lurching forward, but my body wouldn't move. My hands were still locked on the keys, frozen, my arms rigid, as if fused into the piano itself. I could do nothing but watch as the shadows slithered around her ankles, her wrists, pulling her closer to the pit that had opened beneath the altar. My mother looked at me, her face twisted in agony, her lips forming one last word. Forgive. The shadow swallowed her whole. I screamed until my throat split, until blood ran from my lips, but the house devoured even that sound, pulling it into the walls, feeding on my despair. The woman placed her hand over mine on the keys, her touch ice cold, her smile endless. Now it begins. The pews shook as the husks rose, one by one, their chains snapping. They stepped into the aisle, their eyeless faces turned toward me, their mouths opening wide as they repeated the word in unison. Begin, begin, begin. The candles flared, the shadows writhed, and the house groaned like a beast finally awakened from centuries of sleep. And I realized, with a clarity sharper than pain, that I had not inherited the house at all. The house had inherited me. The cathedral quaked as though the foundations of the earth itself were splitting beneath it. Dust rained from the black beams above, and the husks surged closer, their chains rattling in wild, frenzied rhythm. Their chant grew deafening, their hollow voices crashing together like waves of rot and despair. Begin, begin, begin. My hands were still shackled to the piano, fused into its bone-white keys. Every time I tried to pull away, fire shot up my arms, searing me from within, forcing me to keep playing. The melody clawed its way out of me, endless, merciless, a song older than language. The woman from the mirror stood beside me, her face pale, her eyes two voids of hunger. She leaned close, her lips brushing my ear. It is not a curse, she whispered. It is a legacy. We do not haunt the house. The house haunts through us. I shook my head violently, choking on blood and dust. No, I won't. She pressed her hand against my chest. Ice seeped into me, spreading through my veins, slowing my heart to a crawl. You already have, she said. The husks flooded into the aisle, moving in unison, their mouths stretching wider, their smiles splitting until their jaws cracked. One by one, they raised their hands, pointing at me, their chant shifting, deepening into words that tore at my sanity. She is the house. She is the house. She is the house. My stomach lurched as the floor beneath me split open, the cracks glowing with pale light. I looked down and saw faces screaming up at me from the depths, all of them mine. Every reflection I had ever seen, every distorted photograph, every twisted version of myself now trapped in the stone, clawing upward, their mouths begging for release. The piano shook beneath me, the keys splintering, bone shards cutting into my skin. Blood poured across the ivory, soaking into the cracks. The woman smiled, tilting her head as though admiring a portrait finally complete. You play the song of blood, she said, and now the house will sing through you. The husks surged forward, their bodies collapsing into shadows as they swirled around me. The cathedral itself began to twist, the pews splitting, the walls folding inward. The black liquid I had seen before poured from the cracks, rising higher, swallowing everything in its path. And then I heard her voice, my mother's, not in pain this time, not pleading, calm, gentle. Claire, let go. My chest convulsed. I screamed her name, my tears blinding me. But the song bound me tighter, each note dragging me further into the house's core. I could feel myself slipping, my body fading, my soul unraveling into the music. The faces in the stone shrieked louder, their hands bursting through the cracks, grabbing at my legs, my arms, trying to drag me down. The husks raised their voices to a roar. The shadows wrapped tighter around me, pulling me toward the pit that yawned wider beneath the altar. And then the woman placed both of her hands over mine on the keys. One more note, she whispered. One more, and it is done. Her mouth curled into that impossible smile. Then you will never leave again. The cathedral trembled on the edge of collapse, the house groaning as though ready to consume me whole. My heart hammered, the world narrowing to a single choice. My fingers quivered on the keys, my breath catching in my throat. And I knew, if I played that final note, it would be the end. Not just of me, of everything. The house would claim me forever, but if I refused, it would claim her instead. My mother's face flashed in my mind, her eyes wet with tears, her voice soft as ash. Don't. The woman leaned closer, her hollow sockets burning. Play. And I lifted my hands. The cathedral shuddered as I raised my hands from the keys. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound, pressing into my skull, sinking into my bones. For the first time since I had entered that cursed place, the song faltered. The husks froze mid-step, their jaws open in silent rage. The shadows recoiled, swirling uncertainly, as though the house itself didn't understand what I had done. The woman's smile wavered, just slightly, but enough for me to see the crack in her endless certainty. Play, she hissed, her voice like knives. I shook my head, my tears burning down my cheeks. No, the husks screamed, their voices deafening, rattling the cathedral walls until great chunks of stone fell from the ceiling. The pew splintered, the floor cracked, the faces in the stone wailed louder than ever, clawing at my ankles, desperate to drag me into their prison. But still I refused. The woman's form rippled, her pale skin splitting, her hollow eyes glowing with fury. She lunged at me, her hands clawing for my throat, her mouth stretching open in a howl that shook the very beams above. I closed my eyes, and I let go. Not just of the piano, not just of the house, of everything, the fear, the blood, the legacy that bound me. I let it all slip through my fingers, surrendering not to the house, but away from it. The music stopped. The cathedral shattered like glass. The husks collapsed into dust. The shadows shrieked, recoiling into the cracks. The woman screamed as her form splintered, breaking into shards of pale light before dissolving into nothing. And then there was only silence. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor of the parlor. Morning sunlight streamed through the cracked windows, painting the dust in gold. The piano sat closed, silent, its keys still and clean. The photographs on the walls were empty, their frames holding nothing but blank paper. I stumbled to my feet, my body weak, my chest aching. The front door stood before me, the bolt no longer fused, the handle gleaming in the morning light. I grasped it, half expecting it to resist, to burn, to drag me back. But it turned easily. The door opened. And for the first time since I had arrived, I stepped outside. The hill was quiet, the air fresh. Birds sang in the trees, as though the house had never existed. I turned once, my eyes rising to its blackened windows. It stared back at me, silent, still. But I knew. The house wasn't gone. It never would be. It was waiting. Waiting for me. Waiting for the next. Because some inheritances cannot be burned or buried or broken. They live on, patient, hungry, until the blood returns to feed them again. And when I walked away that morning, I carried it with me. The house was in me now. And one day, it will call me back.